Okay, so what I wanted to discuss with you today is this idea of mindfulness in sport, and it's around how we can use this as a tool to create awareness, to make better decisions about how we perform under pressure. And the application of this really is pretty extensive, and mindfulness is something that is discussed a lot in kind of our modern society, and it's used in many different I guess, applications, whether it's with clinical applications, whether it's with business, whether it's with sport. So I want to provide you as coaches and athletes and community members to talk a little bit more about how mindfulness can be used as something that you can use as a tool to deal with the pressures of your sport. So as we get going here, so when I'm talking about mindfulness, what I'm really referring to is the definition that you see on your screen there. Paying attention in a certain way, doing it with a purpose in the present moment, and accepting those thoughts and feelings that you have without judgment. And so when we're talking about mindfulness, that's the definition that I want to go forward with for you to understand the context of what I mean by being mindful. And a lot of this work, mindfulness has been around for thousands of years. It comes from some Eastern religions and Buddhism, and its role in society, and especially in our Western world, has really taken off in, I'd say, the last 30 years. And a lot of it's to do with the guy that you see on your screen right there, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn. You may be familiar with his name. He's written a lot of books for how mindfulness can be used in your daily life. And what he found as a mindfulness practice is that he developed a program to assist with using mindfulness. So being aware of your thoughts and feelings, creating acceptance of those thoughts and feelings, and creating a little bit of a buffer between your awareness of what you think and your immediate reaction to those thoughts and feelings. And so what he found with certain exercises around breathing and body scans and different sort of activities that bring about this idea of paying attention in a certain way, what he found is that parts of the brain that were responsible for empathy, responsible for your own self-awareness, responsible for your sense of perspective, your on-task attention, parts of the brain actually grew in density. So the functioning of the brain in those areas actually improved and increased. And parts of the brain that are responsible for your fight or flight response to stress, that initial fear response that can happen when we get stressed, actually decreased in size. So the brain was able to rewire itself with its use of this mindfulness program. And so the idea behind this is that mindfulness isn't the magic pill that solves all these issues around, as you see on the screen there, depression, stress, and anxiety, but it trains attention. And so it gives the individual more awareness of how they're feeling to make them, to enable them to make better decisions, essentially, under pressure. And so when we're talking about mindfulness in sport, we're talking about that. How can we use mindfulness to become aware of our thoughts and feelings to make better decisions for ourselves under pressure? So a few myths about mindfulness. Mindfulness is it's talked about in many different contexts, and sometimes it's maybe discussed in ways that aren't really applicable or maybe misleading to people. The first thing to consider is that mindfulness doesn't necessarily always equal meditation. There's this myth about mindfulness equals meditation. Meditation is one way to practice mindfulness, but mindfulness can be done informally as well. And it's important to know that. So it can be done kind of in any time and in any place. So the idea of observing your thoughts and feelings and emotions in a non-judgmental way, it doesn't only have to be done through meditation. Another myth about mindfulness is that it doesn't equal bliss. Being mindful means aware of all your emotions that are occurring. So this means being present for moments that are also uncomfortable. So that's important to understand, that when we're talking about mindfulness, it's focusing and being aware of how you're feeling when it's going well, but also being aware of how you're feeling when you are not, you're not looking, you're not having the best day as well. It's being aware of all the spectrum of feelings and emotions that can, that you can experience. And it's also important to know with mindfulness is that It does not mean clearing your head of all thoughts. And it's actually kind of quite the opposite. Mindfulness means bringing awareness to your thoughts, and you're not actually trying to stop or control them. So it's creating this awareness, which, like I mentioned, creates that bit of that buffer. So you don't have that immediate knee-jerk reaction to something that's fearful or something that's stressful in your life. You just recognize for what it is, and then make the decisions that really align with your values and your goals that you have as an athlete. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in this section here. Before we kind of get into it, if you are interested in learning more about mindfulness, Netflix has a really good documentary series. You're probably aware of it. It's called Explained, and there's actually a subsection of that show that focuses on the mind. And there's an episode in this section, or in this series here, that focuses on mindfulness. And it's a really informative, it's about 25-minute long episode, and it gives you a really good kind of crash course on what mindfulness is and how it can be used in your daily life. And so I encourage you to watch that if you're interested in more on this topic. One sec here. So when we're talking about mindfulness, as it relates to sport, what I'm really wanting to discuss here is looking at this in the bigger picture of not only being mindful, but how is this going to actually apply to you as an athlete or as a coach or as a parent or any sort of context within sport. And it builds on this idea that there's other pieces to mindfulness that we need to consider. And so I'm going to go through each of these areas here. It's called the MAC approach. So mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment. So not only how do we create awareness of our thoughts, how do we develop some ways to accept those thoughts and to see them for what they are? And that really builds on this idea that as an athlete that you have thoughts, but you don't own your thoughts. And that's a super important piece that is that we need to consider. And so once we develop that acceptance, how do we really reconnect with what's important to us to really bring out this idea of committing to our actions in the face of these uncomfortable thoughts? And so each of these three areas work together to create this approach that I'm going to explain and give you some detailed examples on how this can apply to you when you're thinking about using mindfulness, not only in sport, but also in other contexts of your life as well. So I'm going to move this over there. So when we are talking about mindfulness, we're really talking about it with one kind of basic assumption here, is that in your sport, there's going to be difficult moments. There's going to be moments where it's not feeling very fun to compete. You're feeling stressed, you're feeling anxious. This idea that athletes are always confident, or high-level athletes are always confident, or they never worry, is just wrong to believe. So as a human being, you're going to experience a wide range of emotions competing in your sport, and mindfulness can be a tool that can help you navigate those emotions. So it helps you provide a clear picture of what the goals are in your sport. And that really outlines, some of the pieces around setting good values and having a clear idea that despite some difficult moments, there are big pieces that are important to you, and how mindfulness can be used as a tool to help navigate that is an important piece of what we're going to talk about today. It allows you to manage, and notice that I don't have the word control. You manage the negative emotions and stress by creating a little bit of a buffer between what the thoughts are that you recognize, the emotions that you recognize, and your immediate reactions to them. And that's an important piece here when we're discussing how it's applicable and how it's effective in helping athletes focus. When you really create a strong sense of self-awareness, you value the process of what you're doing. And athletes are always trying to balance between how they compete and what they have to do to compete well, and the results of their sport. If you get into competitive sport, there's obviously a results element to it. Everyone wants to do the best that they can, but the real kind of trick to all that is to really understand the process of what you're doing. To trust that process is a common term that's used a lot in sport. When you create strong self-awareness habits, you start to value and become really aware of the details of the things that you have to do to perform well. And ultimately, what mindfulness does is improves your focus. The ultimate currency of an athlete is your attention, your ability to stay on task under pressure, to limit distractions and to really focus on the key pieces that allow you to stay on task under pressure. And so mindfulness is something that allows that key piece to happen for athletes as well. So before we kind of get into talking a little bit more about mindfulness, what's really a key piece here is to discuss what's going on with our thoughts and emotions and how those direct our actions. And I'm going to talk about this kind of process here and really dive into where mindfulness plays its key role. So in general, humans have evolved to have thoughts that direct emotions, all right, that influence our actions, all right? And so that's a kind of a key sort of understanding of, in general, we have thoughts, they influence, how we feel, and how we feel can maybe in turn direct what we do. From a sport perspective, where we can fall into a bit of a trouble here is that the idea is, in general, humans look to avoid pain and look to pursue things that make them feel good. That's just kind of generally what we do as human beings. Where the context of sport comes in is that at times that can be very negative in terms of what your overall goals are. Sport's difficult, sport's uncomfortable at times. And so if we're just giving into those negative feelings and removing ourselves from a situation that maybe gives ourselves a little bit of a short-term, kind of a short-term sort of comfort in those feelings, that can solve the issue short term of what we're trying to do with our thoughts and our actions, but over a longer term or a bigger perspective, kind of going through the motions of trying to just avoid pain and discomfort in certain situations can be detrimental to your long-term sort of athletic goals. And so where mindfulness comes in is it really focuses on this connection here between our thoughts and our emotions. As athletes, we can get really fused between these two things. We can be really fear of failure. We can be fearful of, letting people down. And we can believe the kind of inner experience that we create between these thoughts and negative emotions to be really true. And so what mindfulness does is it allows you just to kind of untangle that situation a little bit. It allows you, like I said, to make just better decisions under pressure. So when we're talking about using mindfulness, we're looking to untangle some of the thoughts and emotions that become really, really strong, which allow us to maybe not perform at our highest level. So how do we generate some awareness of what we're doing? All right, and this is a simple exercise that athletes can do just to kind of start to create a little bit of awareness of the different thoughts and feelings that they can experience in their sport. So the goal here is to have this blue focus at the center of that circle there. So that's where you're focused on the game or the task or whatever you're doing. And there's no judgment about those thoughts. You're just focused on what they are, and you're totally just kind of immersed in that self-awareness of just being really present with those thoughts. However, that's not always the case, all right? And there can be a number of different thoughts that can come through an athlete's mind or a coach's mind around competition, is that you can then maybe start to focus on distraction. So as you kind of move towards the outside rings of the circle, the yellow focus is when you're kind of you're paying attention to the distractions rather than focusing on the task. You go to an orange focus, you're starting to evaluate your performance. Am I playing good? Am I playing bad? Am I playing, what does this mean? And you're starting to sort of judge yourself a little bit around how you're doing. And that can be a negative impact on your on-task focus. You go a little bit deeper, a little bit into that, and you can start to focus on the results and consequences of what you're doing. And that can allow you, once again, to start to judge yourself a little bit more in competition and really create some anxious moments. And then obviously the fifth kind of the outer ring is focusing outside of your sport. So things totally unrelated to what you're doing in the current moment. So an exercise that athletes can do is just to reflect on a past practice or past competition and just start to generate a little bit of a radar and pay attention to where your thoughts are going. And a little process to follow is to just pay attention to where you're at, whether you have a break for water or there's a break in play or there's, whatever the context of your sport, pay attention to where things are at and label your thoughts of where they are. Are they yellow? Are they orange? Are they red? Are they blue? And what that does, when you start to label your thoughts like that, you start to create a little bit of a separation between you and your thoughts. You just start to see them for what they are. All right. And then it's just about accepting the fact that your thoughts are a color that is not blue. All right. And then your task as an athlete is to refocus. How do you refine that blue center? And that can be done through setting up a routine that reconnects with something that you see and feel in your sport. All right. That can be done with some breathing exercises. That can be done by effective preparation. All right. There's many different skills as an athlete that athletes can use to refocus, but it's just about creating a structure to develop some self-awareness and to see the thoughts for what they are, and then just to label them and then reconnect with what is most important for you. So I'm just going to go through the mindfulness acceptance commitment pieces just in general, and then I'm going to provide you some examples of how they can apply to your sport. So when we're talking about acceptance, it's now moving on from this idea of, okay, we have awareness of our thoughts. And acceptance is key, and that is your willingness to accept these thoughts. And as an athlete, you have thoughts, but you don't own your thoughts. And that's where that fusion comes between thoughts and emotions, is sometimes we think we own our thoughts. All right. And it's very difficult to have control over everything you think and see and feel. All right. So when we're accepting, we're not resigning to the fact that we have these negative thoughts. We're just aware of them and we don't judge them for what they are. All right. And so ways to build this concept within yourself is to use some metaphors. All right. And that's an effective way to maybe build out this idea of what acceptance means. And I'll explain an example here. Imagine that, there's a big oak tree and it's in the fall and you're watching this tree and it's a really windy day and all the leaves are starting to blow everywhere, all over the place. And you think, okay, you're going to focus on one leaf and you're going to watch it all the way to the ground. All right. And so the difficulty of that is you're trying to focus on one leaf and there's chaos. There's leaves going left, right, up and down. There's thousands of leaves in the air and you're trying to focus on one that goes all the way down to the ground. All right. So I want you to compare that to a thought that can come through your mind around competition. All right. You can have a thought that you pay attention to, you really focus on, and it allows and it provides a big distraction. You start to really own that thought and you can't let it go. So what this idea of this use of a metaphor is that instead of really focusing on one leaf and watching it all the way down to the ground, can we just have the ability just to step back and see the thoughts for what they are, the leaves for what they are, and not try and focus on one specifically. All right. And that's this idea. There's many different metaphors. You can use clouds in the sky. You can use different examples where instead of really just trying to focus on one and really control that one thought, let's just have this ability to step back a little bit and see those thoughts pass by, because they are temporary, they do end, and then there's your attention is focused on a different thing. Another way to do this is to label your thoughts. Instead of saying, I can't do this, it's starting to create a little bit of distance with some language. So I'm an athlete right now that thinks I can't do this. All right. And that's an important way to start to just not take so much ownership over these negative thoughts that can come to mind. All right. So there's different examples here, and there's a lot more that we can dive into on this. But this idea of acceptance is really understanding that, your brain over time builds up these patterns of really owning thoughts. And in your sport, that can be very inconvenient for what you're trying to do. So when we're talking about commitment, and this is a key piece here, what I'm referring to is two different options that we can view our performance. What are the values that we have, and how do we take a values-driven approach to adversity in our sport versus an avoidance-driven approach? All right, and I have two examples here for you. A values-driven approach is something that is really connected to the bigger picture. It's connected with something that, is held true to you, something that you really believe in, a value that you hold, that you want to be seen, that you want to see for yourself. All right. So an example being, if I'm a committed parent, all right, I want to make sure that, I'm always there. I'm always available. I'm always present for say my son or daughter's soccer practice. All right. So the difference between a value and a goal is that a value is that I'm committed to being there for my children. And a goal would be, I would make every practice, I would make every game throughout the season. All right. So value is something that is really like an anchor, something that can kind of guide you through difficult moments. And the avoidance driven path is something that athletes and individuals can follow often is that it kind of gives into maybe the uncomfortable temporary negative feelings that conflict or adversity can present. All right. And so in the short term, it kind of removes ourselves from that situation, and it kind of satisfies that need to kind of run away from that fear or adversity in that moment. But over the long term, if we continually do that, we're going to sell ourselves short a little bit on the goals and achievements that we want to try and strive towards in our sport. So as an athlete, what we're trying to do is really identify what values are really important to us and how do those enhance our commitment to the cause that you have within your sport. So like I mentioned here, values are a little bit stronger than goals. They're a little bit more of a deeper foundation and provide that meaning for the athlete, right? So they're kind of a compass that directs you through difficult times, and it allows you to really kind of deal with intense situations where things cannot go to plan. Things can be kind of come at you from a difficult perspective. But if you have these values in place, all right, it allows you to kind of weather that storm a little bit. And I'm going to provide an example of what I mean by that in a second here. And so it just provides ways and for athletes to find, what they can do to commit to their actions. Like, what are the actual steps that they have to take that allow them to persist despite some difficulty. And so when we when we're setting our values, it's a difficult process, and it's some heavy lifting that athletes and coaches and everyone has to do kind of outside their competition. And I was just looking at these three areas, in competition, in training, out of your sport, how do you want to approach your competition? All right. How do you want others to think of you playing? All right. And so looking at from that perspective allows you to maybe start to identify, well, I want to be seen as committed. I want to be seen as dedicated. I want to be seen as honest. How do you want to be a teammate? How do you want to be, different sort of contexts within your sport? So many different examples of values. All right. You can read them for yourself. There's hundreds of values that you could identify with. I just provided a few for you to think on. And it's really important for anyone to really kind of set some values. What's the value-driven behavior that you want to show within your sport? What does it mean to be passionate? What does it mean to show courage? What does it mean to be consistent and reliable? All right. So these are some examples, and I want to give you kind of present an exercise that you can do that kind of really ties all the pieces I just discussed. So when we're talking about tying all this stuff together, there's a exercise that athletes can do called the Sport Lifeline. And what the Sport Lifeline is an opportunity to reflect on the different pieces that I just discussed. It's an opportunity for an athlete to practice mindfulness and be aware and create that self-awareness of how they're thinking and feeling. It's an opportunity for athletes to develop a level of acceptance for those thoughts. And from that acceptance, how do they really re-engage with some values that they have set to enhance the commitment to the bigger picture of what they're trying to do? All right. And so it outlines two different ways: the values-driven path towards your goals, and provides an example of what that looks like. And then it provides an example of what an avoidance-driven path looks like to a situation. And it really starts to highlight the role of how these values, all right, provide an important tool for athletes to commit to something and override these kind of maybe negative temporary feelings of anxiety and worry that can happen. And how do they really commit to the bigger picture and the goals that they set? So I have an example here that I want to walk you through that hopefully provides a little bit more clarity to what I'm talking about. So like I mentioned here, we have two different options. We have the values-driven path, the kind of the anchor and the things that really hold us close to what we're trying to do. And then we have the avoidance-driven path. All right, so this is something that in the short term provides a little bit of sense of relief, but if we consistently do this over and over and over again, we're not really committed to our values, and it kind of leaves that sort of emptiness and that feeling that, we're not really pursuing what we really need to do. We're not making the choices that are really aligning ourselves with our goals and our desires out of our situation. So I'll give you an example. In this situation, we could have like a track athlete, for example. And so I'm going to provide a situation here. So the track athlete, they're into this like qualifying competition. All right. And it's an important competition that sets up their participation in some further championships later in the season. And the first part of this is to outline, okay, as this athlete, what are the values that they have? If they're going to follow a values-driven path, what does that look like? What are some values that really resonate with them and that are important for them to understand? So the values that we set, as this athlete, if I use myself as an example, I want to be seen as committed. So I want to show that, I'm working hard, I'm dedicated to what I'm not only dedicated, but I'm committed to the cause of what I'm doing. So I'm giving lots of effort. I'm asking good questions. I'm really making sure that, the time that I give, I'm fully there. I'm fully present for the time that I give. Dedicated, meaning, I want to be a good teammate. I want to have a good relationship with my coach. I really care and I identify with what I'm doing. And then I want to be responsible. So I want to make the good decisions that show that I care about what I'm doing, and that I'm making the effort to put my best foot forward with my performance in my sport. So as an athlete, I have these values here, and I'm going to walk through a situation where those values and the awareness of those values is super important to make the right decision under pressure. So a difficult situation is that, at this competition, I have a really poor performance. All right. I fall well below the expectations that I wanted to show. And I'm really upset. I'm really, really kind of frustrated and down about what just happened. All right. And so my process is that, after, regardless of whether I have a race that's good or bad, I usually have a debrief with my coach and we go over what went well, what did not go well. And and it just kind of sets me up for the rest of my day. So after the situation, my reaction to this is that, my thoughts and feelings that, I feel like, I've let everyone down. My coach doesn't have a lot of confidence in me. I don't have a lot of confidence in myself. I feel really negative, and I feel I'm experiencing a lot of negative emotions, a lot of negative thoughts, and I'm not happy with my situation. So in this certain situation here, at this point, an athlete has a decision to make, and whether they really realize it or not, do they make a decision that follows further down that values-driven path, or do they make a decision that is more down that avoidance-driven path as a reaction to these thoughts and feelings that they're experiencing? All right, so if I don't really have a lot of awareness of how I'm thinking, or I'm really kind of not paying fully attention to what I'm doing, I could make a decision that maybe is not the best for that situation. So instead of going and speaking with my coach, I avoid the coach. All right. I make a choice that, this is a decision that I want to make because it's just going to kind of remove me from that uncomfortable conversation. And it's not something that I want to pursue. So instead of really going forward and having my debrief with my coach, I just kind of totally skip out on that meeting and I go elsewhere and I just kind of avoid that situation altogether. And so, the short-term reward from that is that, I protect myself a little bit, that feeling of being uncomfortable and having a difficult conversation. I solve that by not having that. I just completely forget that and just go on with the rest of my day. And I just kind of remove myself from that. But in doing that, you have to ask yourself, is that in line with the values that I had previously set at the start of the season, that, I truly believe in, I truly feel these things. And in this moment, it's a temporary negative feeling. All right. And I make a decision that is probably not in line with my values. And so the consequence of that is that, I don't really get the feedback that helps me improve. It's not very responsible of me. It's not very committed of me. I'm not really following through with what I agreed to do with my coach. And so if the athlete has some strong, kind of looking at that wheel of mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment, if they have an understanding of how they're feeling and they're thinking, yeah, right now, yeah, like this sucks. I'm frustrated. I feel down. But I understand that, these feelings, they're natural. All right. There's going to be ups and downs within my sport, and I can accept these feelings for what they are. And I choose, even though it might seem a little bit uncomfortable, I choose to go forward and I choose to have that meeting with my coach. where they give me some really good feedback. And it's maybe not the easiest conversation, but I set my, my rest of my day up, and I'm able to recover, and I'm able to continue and persevere despite what I'm doing. All right. And so this is an example of how athletes can kind of take those concepts I had described and apply them in a way that, allows them to make those good decisions. All right. And this is one example. There's many, many different examples, but it's an opportunity for you to reflect on, within your sport, the values that you set. How did those impact some of the decisions that you make? And are you choosing to just go down that avoidance driven path, which is the easy way to go? And it does provide benefit in terms of its short term. It provides a little bit of a reprieve on the situation, but long term, consistently going down that path pulls you away from the ultimate goals and values that you want to hold yourself to in your sport. So that's kind of a quick overview of this mindfulness acceptance commitment approach. And it's something that's important for athletes to kind of work through individually. And I went through it fairly quickly. There's tons of work, and I'm going to share some resources of how athletes can learn more about this if they're interested. But now I've just kind of talked about this from a big picture perspective, and we're actually talking about mindfulness. I want to change gears a little bit and discuss what are some actual activities, things that athletes can do to increase their ability to be self-aware. All right. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time discussing a few of these approaches, and then I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end. So I want you to think of mindfulness similar to physical exercise. All right. And so what I mean by that is, you can practice, you can informally practice exercise, physical exercise. You could be conscious of I'm going to take the stairs instead of the elevator. I'm going to wear a smartwatch that's going to tell me, my step count, and just kind of give me subtle reminders to get out and moving. I'm going to find, different ways to get active in my way to get to work or school, if that's an option. Or you could formally practice exercise in terms of like really dedicating time out of your day to go to the gym, go to a fitness class, go to a spin class, play your sport, get your heart rate elevated into a certain range and formally practice and get your 60 minutes of exercise that's required. And I want you to think of mindfulness in the same way. You can kind of informally practice mindfulness and take moments of your day to do some certain activities that allow you to just kind of reconnect with how you're thinking and feeling, and just to create some self-awareness of what you're doing. And then there's ways where you can formally practice mindfulness, where you're really focusing on some breathing exercises that just get you totally thinking about, being aware of your thoughts, reconnecting with your breath, and reconnecting with what you're feeling in your body. And that's a little bit more of that mindfulness meditation that people can practice and develop a practice to start to, once again, strengthen those areas of the brain that start to build on-task focus, develop empathy, and build a sense of self-awareness. So some informal practice exercises. First one's called Take 5. And so it's where you hold out your hand when you arrive to a place that you're feeling stressed. You take a deep breath in, and you just calmly raise your finger outside one side of your pinky, and then exhale slowly on the down side of your pinky. And then you go up your ring finger, you breathe in, and then you breathe out. And you just take 5 simple inhales and exhales, and you just allow yourself to reconnect with where you are, what you're doing. And it's just a quick little exercise just to start to just kind of put the brakes on what you're doing a little bit, and just literally take 5 breaths to just calm down and focus on what you're doing. A minute to arrive. All right. That's a simple exercise where, people live very busy lives. They're always jumping from one thing to the next. And I think, especially as an athlete, if, you're running from school and you're running from, another commitment, and you're coming from the gym and you arrive at practice and you feel a little scrambled in your mind, take a minute to arrive. So just take a minute to settle into the locker room. What do you notice? How do you feel? Who's there? What's your intention for today? All right, you take a minute just to kind of settle into your new space instead of just kind of going through the motions and immediately running in, feeling flustered, throwing in your gear, running out on the field. Take a second just to kind of settle into the place of what you're doing and reconnect with some of your senses there. Hands-on, I put in quotes a water bottle, but it can be used anything in your sport. And it's a way for any time that you come back to a piece of equipment, whether it's in a break, so a water bottle, within a water break in a practice or at a game, depending on the context of your sport, you're going to have more or less opportunities to do that. You reconnect with the intention of why you're there today. You wanted to show up to work hard. You wanted to show up to be committed. You wanted to show up to have fun. Regardless of what's happened, every time you come back to that water bottle and you take a drink, that water bottle serves as a cue to reconnect with those intentions of why you're there that day. And one of my favorite ones, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, is a great exercise just to kind of once again reconnect with the present moment. And so when you notice that you're feeling flustered or nervous or anxious, what you can do is you can notice, look for 5 things that you can see in your immediate environment. So you can just do this right now. As I'm speaking, you're at your home, wherever you are, you're listening to me speak. Look around the room, notice 5 things that you can see. All right, and once you've done that, notice four things in your immediate environment that you can touch. It could be your hand, it could be a ring on your finger, it could be your phone or your computer, it could be the table or the chair that you're sitting at, it could be the fabric of your shirt that you're wearing. All right, and once you've done that, notice 3 things that you can hear. All right, so at home, it could be the traffic going by, it could be someone in another room, it could be birds chirping in a tree. All right, then move to what are 2 things that you can smell in your environment. And if you can't think of anything immediate in your environment that you can smell, maybe some gum that you're chewing, whatever, think of like, what are some of your favorite smells? And then finally, what's 1 thing that you can taste? All right, so if you've got a drink next to you or you're having a snack, like pay attention to that taste. So that's a really good example that allows you to really identify with things in your immediate environment. And there are ways that you can informally practice mindfulness. So some formal practice now is really setting time aside to really focus on your breath and really focusing on some breathing exercises that reconnect with what you feel in your body and what you notice in your mind. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect with our diaphragm when we're breathing. All right. And so that's, for those that don't know, your diaphragm is a layer of muscle tissue that separates your chest cavity from your stomach cavity. And it's an important part in breathing and maximizing the oxygen intake that you can bring into your lungs. And so a simple way to practice is just to notice, a lot of people when they carry stress and they use only a small fraction of their lung capacity, and the diaphragm's not activated when you breathe. So a simple way to do this is to put your hand on your stomach, and when you exhale, your hand falls, and when you inhale, your hand rises and your belly expands. And what that does is that when your stomach expands and your hand moves up, your diaphragm is pushing down and it's pulling air into your lungs. And then when your hand falls, your diaphragm is pushing back up into your lung cavity and using your rib cage muscles to like squeeze your lungs and expel air and CO2. So you can do that without just on your own. You can also get apps that help you just with the timing of the breathing. And there's an app called Breathe Plus that you see on the screen here. And I just put this little video in. You can set the timing to like the length of the inhale, the hold, and the exhale. 3-2-5 is a common breath that athletes can use to calm down. All right, and so you can set all these different settings on the breathing app. And what the benefit of this is, it gives you that cadence, that timing. You hold, and then you have a long, controlled exhale, just to start to reconnect with your breath and start to practice the timing of it. Because if you breathe too quickly, you're actually just going to activate your body's response to stress. If you don't use your diaphragm and you use more of like your chest and your shoulders to control your breathing, you're not actually going to be able to relax and just really focus on how you're feeling and focusing on that present moment. All right, so there's a little example of what you can do. And so what I wanted to do is provide a few options that you can go further into, working on some mindfulness meditation when you're breathing. And it involves the use of biofeedback. And I'm going to explain what this is. So this is something that's relatively new, and it's used a lot now with helping athletes work on concepts that are maybe somewhat vague in our general discussion. So everyone knows what focus is, because you can think of times when you've been really focused and on task, and you can think of times when you have been really distracted and off off of focus. You can think of times when you've been really relaxed and calm, and then you can think of times you've been really unrelaxed and stressed. All right, but it's tough to know how much or for how long or for without any of those things. And so biofeedback is something that you can use that uses your body, things within your body, your heart rate variability, that provides some objective feedback of how your body is responding to stress. And some people have, like, if you have like a smartwatch that measures like heart rate variability, then you're already using biofeedback without maybe really even noticing it. So, little quick overview of your nervous system and what we're doing here and why this is important for getting some feedback on how to breathe properly. Your central nervous system, which you see here, that's your brain, your spinal cord. And then in addition to that, there's your peripheral nervous system. So that's all the nerve endings that go out to all the different parts of your body and then back to the spinal cord and brain to share that information about you moving around, your balance, all the different roles that your nervous system plays in your body. As it relates to sport, so this peripheral system is broken further into two areas. The somatic, so that's your voluntary control. So when you're playing your sport, you see the ball, you hit the ball, you're making those voluntary choices, all right, to move your body in certain ways. All right, and so that's using your somatic nervous system. And over time with practice, those things seem to come automatic, but you're making those decisions to move your body in certain ways, even if they are extremely quick. The autonomic system, and that's what we're using biofeedback for. So so it's broken down here, and you can see the sympathetic system here. That's your fight or flight response. That's your response to stress. And so you see the bullet points on the side. When this is activated, your heart rate goes up, your respiration rate goes up, you breathe more per minute. Your heart rate variability goes down, and I'm going to explain a little bit more what that is in a second. Your muscle tension goes up, your body temperature actually goes down, you increase your sweating, perspiration, all right, and your ability to focus is lowered. What we're trying to train with biofeedback and with using mindfulness practice is to activate the parasympathetic. So that is like the handbrake to your response to stress, all right? And so it's important to know the balance between these two things. It's not that this is ever turned off, but we have this underutilized within our body. We're always going to be responding to stress, and every time that we have a negative emotion or thought around our competition, we're not creating that buffer if our parasympathetic system is not activated. So we use biofeedback in a couple of ways. And here's some products that I don't have any affiliation to, but they're just affordable products that you can use to work on this sort of stuff. First one's called HeartMath, and it is a heart rate variability trainer. All right, so this is an affordable thing that just connects to your phone. You would put the clip under your earlobe, and you attach this receiver here just to your shirt. And what you're doing is you're training heart rate variability, which is the amount of time between your heart beats. Okay, so think of a stressful heartbeat. What does that sound like? It's probably pretty loud, pretty consistent. It's like someone rapping on a door, like knocking on a door really loudly, really fast and quick. And what that means is that there's very low variability in your heart rate. So it's very consistent. It's like boom, 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 boom. When you have a high heart rate variability, there's a little bit more variance in between each of the heartbeats. And it's not to the point where it's irregular. That's a totally different serious issue. But there's a bit more time in between some of the heartbeats. All right. And so what that means is that the parasympathetic system is activated in this high HRV. And so you have, attributes of what high and low HRV, you can read those on the screen for yourself. And what you're trying to do is reach coherence, which is what this HeartMath software helps you do. And that's when you have a parallel between your HRV and your respiratory rate. When those kind of run in parallel to each other, that means that your body's responding to stress, there's clarity, and that's when you're starting to get into the areas of where you're making effective practice within your mindfulness breathing. So you can use these tools as objective feedback for understanding how your body's responding to stress. Another approach is to look at your brain and look at the signals that your brain gives out. All right. And so there's an at-home tool that I'm going to explain in a second, but there's if you were to go to a medical center, they'd have super powerful, sophisticated EEG machines, all right, that measure your brain activity. And I want you to think of your brain activity on this spectrum here. It can have really low levels of frequency, firing of neurons, and it can have really high levels of frequency of firing of neurons. When you have that kind of this alpha, this is kind of the goal within mindfulness practice, is to be really relaxed, have a broad focus, be aware of your thoughts, but not be reactive to them. Just be aware of how you're thinking and feeling. This is kind of the goal that we want to try and get to with mindfulness practice. All right. And so as you get more focused and alert or more intense and you're trying too hard, that's where it's more of your response to stress. And then at the low ends here, that's when you're kind of underactivated a little bit. And so what's a tool that we can use to actually use is this type of feedback to help us with our mindfulness practice. And this is this Muse headband. And you may have seen this before, but it's a headband that fits on your forehead and it gives you auditory feedback on how you're breathing and what the signals of your brain are, that indicate, what range of that spectrum that your brain is falling into. So as an example, if you put this headband on and your brain is super overly activated, you're going to hear sounds of like waves crashing into the shoreline. And think of like an intense storm on the West Coast. It's just massive waves crashing into the shore, and it's just creating a lot of noise and chaos. So you work on your breathing, you focus on just working on some internal strategies that you develop to just become aware of your thoughts, let those thoughts go, reconnect with your breath, and slowly that wave will calm down. And once it gets to that kind of range in which you set the goal at, in terms of, that spectrum that you outlined, you can adjust depending on your ability to do it. That wave will go from a crashing wave into kind of like a lapping wave against the shore. And so it provides you some kind of auditory feedback to let you know that you're making progress on your breathing and you're starting to respond to your body's response to stress. So it's important to know that these things are tools that you can use, and it just provides a little bit more objective feedback. But the process of practicing mindfulness meditation, it takes a lot of invested time and effort to work on it, and it's not easy. It takes time to develop. So just to kind of like finish up and wrap up here, when we're practicing mindfulness for our sport, for this kind of formal practice, here's a few points to think of. And it's really important to kind of ground yourself with your breath, because your breath is you feel it, you can control it, and you can really reconnect with the feeling that your breath can provide on your body. So remember to breathe with your diaphragm and really just reconnecting and allowing your mind to wander. And it's not so much about controlling your mind and making sure it doesn't wander at all. It's the ability to bring it back. All right. Notice that it wanders, bring it back to your breath. Notice that it wanders, bring it back to your breath. And if you do this for, a minute at a time, 2 minutes at a time, you're going to notice that your mind is going to wander a lot. And it's not, like I said, that's not the whole point. It's the ability to bring yourself back. So where I want to kind of finish up here, and if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box, or if you'd like, welcome to just turn on your microphone and ask a question. There's some additional readings here. I'm going to send the slides out, and these have links to some books that I would recommend if you're learning more about how to use mindfulness in sport. They provide some really good applied exercises that you can build off of this presentation. And the top one here, George Mumford. If any of you watched The Last Dance, that Netflix documentary with Michael Jordan, George Mumford was a guy that worked closely with Phil Jackson, the coach of the Bulls teams of the 90s and the Lakers teams of the 2000s, that really, where he really brought this idea of mindfulness training. And he did it with these teams of Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal's, Michael Jordan's, Scottie Pippen's, all those players, in terms of how they use mindfulness as a tool to perform under pressure. And so that's a really good read. And some of these ones provide a little bit more applied exercises rather than more of the anecdotal evidence in the top book there. So that kind of brings me to the end of the talk. And I just wanted to leave a few minutes to open the floor for any questions that anyone had from the presentation. there's something in the chat here. So Darren, a coach you've been to boys soccer, you mentioned thoughts and emotions. What do you suggest when players express negative emotions to their teammates? So I think that ties into something that it's just more about creating the awareness of those emotions that those players experience. And so obviously it's understanding that, you know, within a team environment, if everyone's committed to what we're doing, to, you know, the team goals of working hard, and, you know, usually negative emotions arise when mistakes are made. And so it's just outlining, you know, the role that, you know, no one's intentionally out here trying to make mistakes, and it's understandable that, you know, you're going to have a negative reaction, but it's about being aware of that emotion, all right, and understanding that, you know, what's the goal of this situation? Is it that, you know, are you going to lash out at your teammate, and maybe in the interim, you know, you feel a little bit better about yourself because you rented out your frustration? But what's the consequence of expressing those negative emotions? Is it going to bring us closer to the goals that we have as a group, or is it going to move us farther away? And so it's about challenging the athletes to see that emotion and then react in a way, all right, that's a little bit more positive. All right. So seeing like, and an easiest example is like, what would be your reaction if someone lashed out at you? You probably get frustrated. You probably wouldn't want to pass them the ball anymore. You know, you probably not feel so positive towards that individual. So it's just getting players to just the ability to kind of like step back and see the consequence of those reactions to those emotions, and what's the big picture. And obviously frustration is natural, but how can we move beyond, you know, that personal sort of satisfaction of venting or you know, getting rid of that frustration, and what's the versus like what's the consequence of that action towards that teammate. Awesome. Is there anyone else that has any questions about great. So if there are no more questions, what I just wanted to mention here while we have a few minutes, what I've been working on over the last few months is something that I'm excited to share. And then I encourage, like, if you're interested in learning more about mental skills but unsure about where to fit it into your schedule as an athlete, I've developed a mental training course at PacificSport, and it's something that is going to be run online on a Google Classroom platform. And so what it is, it's a self-paced course. All right. So there's 4 modules that go through, and there's information, there's similar to what we learned about today. There's information that, you know, you would read, and it's not an overload of information, but it's just kind of like a slide deck that has specific notes and points to understand more about the topic that you're working on. And then there's activities that you would do at your own pace that are all done online. And after you submit, you know, within a module, then I come in, I review it, I give you some feedback on it, and then you move forward onto the next module. So it's things that, you know, looking at these 4 areas: how to set effective goals, how to build your confidence, how to develop something around the performance mindset. So how to, you know, develop strategies to build optimal intensity and focus for your sport, and then how to manage stress. And so some of the stuff that we discussed today would definitely fall into that managing stress module. And like I said, it's all at your own pace, and it's intended to provide you the flexibility for you to work on some mental training outside of, you know, the demands of your sport. So it's something that I'm looking to launch at the end of this month. And there'll be more information on our website and on our social media platforms around this. But it's if you're interested in wondering, like, oh yeah, I've always been interested in learning more about mental training, I just don't know where I'm going to find the time. Hopefully this is something that is an option for you that you can consider, and it's going to be very affordable. We haven't totally settled on a price yet, but it'll be very, very very affordable for what the course offers for you. So keep that in mind. Keep a lookout for that if that's something that interests you moving forward. Yeah, hopefully that's something that is of that you could benefit from in the future. If you're able to join next week, this time I'm going to be speaking about using imagery and visualization and how you can use that as an effective tool to refocus and prepare in your competition. So it just gets you thinking about, what are the things you need to be thinking and feeling about. And during a time, obviously in this pandemic, we haven't had a lot of opportunity to play our sport. And so using imagery is a really effective tool that you can use to kind of keep sharp with some of the details that are important for your performance. So if there's no other questions, I will, I'll sign us off here, and I will send everyone the slides that we're able to join in today. Yeah, hopefully see you next week. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to my email, and I'll hopefully be able to answer any questions that you have. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.